We must not let our children, grandchildren, and later generations be predestined to apologize for a war they had nothing to do with.
It is true that the Prime Minister's statement left much to be desired.
Welcome back. During the course of Japan's rise, starting from the late 17th century, it colonized and set up puppet states in Taiwan, the Korean Peninsula, and later on, after 1940, many South Asian countries. The Japanese army enslaved an estimated 300,000 Chinese women as sex slaves or comfort women from these occupied territories. Joining me now in the studio to discuss all these issues is Ming. He's a professor of government and international affairs at George Mason University. Also with us on set, Jungsil. She's the president of the Washington Coalition for Comfort Women Issues. Welcome to you both. Jungsil, let me begin with you. As we mentioned, hundreds of thousands of women enslaved, kidnapping, raped by the Japanese military. What do these women want to hear from Japan? But before you answer, in a recent speech, Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe said, "I am deeply pained to think about the comfort women who experienced immeasurable pain and suffering as a result of victimization due to human trafficking." For thousands of victims who endured Japan's brutality, these women, these comfort women, are those words enough?
What they wanted is just official apology and legal reparation from the Japanese government, the governmental level, not as individuals or NGOs and NPOs. And what he said recently, Prime Minister Abe, sounds like an indirect bystander who doesn't have legal responsibility. It's a very vague and indirect emotional expressions, and doesn't really express who, when, why, and how happened, and it doesn't really express about the historical responsibility of the past wrongdoing.
Ming, let me ask you this. Up to 20 million deaths from combat, famine, and disease. Why do you think so few people in the West know about these staggering numbers and what the Japanese military did during that time?
Yeah, I can speak for all the Western countries. I've been to some of these countries, but I'm more familiar with the United States. And in the United States, if you ask average person about historical facts, they tend to be quite fuzzy about it. But one thing is clear: the Second World War is well known here, and people know there's a right and there's a wrong. And the United States was on the right side, and China was also on the right side. But when it comes to particular numbers, I don't think people really know that much about. Scholars, of course, talk about it. They may cite the Chinese government's number, but at the same time, and they may also, want to see more empirical evidence, and because they are scholars, right? They want to see where the number exactly come from. But that doesn't mean that they deny that Chinese suffer tremendously. Not just Chinese, but Koreans and others.
It just seems when you talk about the Nazi Holocaust, Germany's invasion of Poland, there is such a sense of awareness about what happened. But when it comes to Japan's atrocities in Asia, that sense of awareness is not really there to that extent.
Right. But it's changing because the efforts by NGOs, such as Dr. Lee's NGO and people talking about it. And part of it has also having to do with democracy and opening up. In the case of in Korea, it's democracy, and people can now more freely talk about this issue. And so all these issues are coming up.
Let me go back to this issue of apology, and this is a question to both of you. Japan says it has repeatedly apologized for its actions. Are Asian countries like Korea and China, are they looking for specific words? Because we have heard the word deep remorse, we have heard profound grief, we have also heard the word heartfelt apology. Is this more about certain words that we should be hearing from Shinzo Abe, from the Japanese, or is it more about actions?
I think it's maybe both. The word itself also, I think, is a lack of specificity, lack of totality, And as I said, and then it just, had to describe the historical facts, and then followed by the legal reparation, the financial reparation. And in my opinion, there might be difficulty for Japan to apologize and do the actions because there's a lot of issues come along with that. It's kind of a spilling effect. It's not only the Korean comfort women. As I said, the number of comfort women, more than 7 countries comfort women will insist or will request of the reparations and apology. And then also expand to the other wartime victims, for example, the American and Canadian, prisoners during the wartime. So it might not be an easy task for Japan and specifically Prime Minister Abe.
Professor Won, your thoughts?
Yeah, and people are looking for specific words, right? Things like invasion, colonial domination, comfort women, apology, and for Prime Minister Abe's statement, because this is partly symbolic. At the same time, people also want to look at other issues. What other things the Japanese government has been doing, and besides this statement, that's why the.
And let's talk about those other issues. A controversial security bill in Japan that would change Japan's post-war pacifist constitution. It would allow troops to fight overseas, Japanese troops to fight overseas for the first time since World War II. Clearly, a lot of opposition to this inside Japan. We have seen protest after protest. So what's behind Japan's military shift? And how do Japan's neighbors see this? Let's start with you, Professor Wong.
Yeah, Japan has always had essentially different lines, if you will, since the end of the Second World War. Supposedly, I'm not supposedly, there are so-called progressive forces, and then there are more conservative forces. But with the end of the Cold War, the so-called progressive forces were weakened. And until very recently, you seem to see a larger trend toward a more sort of rightward and more revisionist, more nationalistic. And but now I think that lots of Chinese have realized this is very serious, right? And people will die, and soldiers may be sent overseas. So that's why you begin to see this opposition. In the end, probably Prime Minister Abe may still push through some of these measures, but domestic politics is heating up clearly in Japan. Part of the reason is that lots of Japanese recognize that Asian countries, particularly in Northeast Asia, there is a difference in reaction to this. China and South Korea tend to react more strongly because they were the more direct target of Japanese aggression for much longer period of time.
Jungsil Lee, let me turn to you. And again, this is a question to both of you. What are the lessons learned here, and how can we heal the wounds of war that are still so real and so raw in China, in Korea, and in many Asian countries?
The first of all, what they wanted is to hear and then do some actions from Japanese government. But in addition to it, what we can do, specifically the one who sympathize of these women, what we can do is to educate, to share these ideas, and do a lot of grassroots movements here in U.S., for example, and also help these victims in many ways. Though one of the ways we did is actually involve them in the cultural activity. It's a part of a healing process. We did organize some art exhibition, for example. We did some programs of the cultural activities with them. And we invited a lot of victims from Korea to here in the U.S. and then did tours. We're visiting the memorials, for example, the memorial, the Comfort Woman memorials here in Virginia and then the other side too. So,
Professor Won, how can we heal the wounds of war? And what are the lessons learned?
Yeah, Japan actually has done a good number of good things for Asia since the end of the Second World War, such as ODA and other areas. But you have this persistent revisionist trend in the country that keep wanting to say that Japan didn't do anything wrong. In fact, Japan was doing Asia a big favor. So in the sense that these people are shooting themselves in the foot, and it is sort of a compromising sort of their standing among some Asian countries. And I agree with Dr. Lee. What they need to do is just be sincere about it, rather than this long, tortured process. What words to say? Just either you're sorry or you're not sorry. Say you're sorry, and then adopt some legal action. And recognize that this is the responsibility of the Japanese state. Right? People are not really saying individual Japanese should keep apologizing forever. But there is a state responsibility. The Japanese state did this, and some of the issues, at least for lots of Asian countries, has not been fully recognized. They need to address this because we need historical reconciliation so that we can all move forward.